Pleasure to go back to Lahav Harkov, the Jerusalem Post diplomatic correspondent, who will moderate our next panel, Stronger Together, Interfaith Action Against Antisemitism.
So on our panel on interfaith efforts at fighting anti-Semitism, we have Dr. Misha Galperin, president of Zandafi Philanthropic Advisors, senior advisor to the Combat Antisemitism Movement, Anila Ali, founder and president of American Muslim and Multifaith Women's Empowerment Council, and Pastor Todd Stavrakos of the Gladwyne Presbyterian Church in Pennsylvania. Welcome, everyone. I'm very interested in hearing your experiences and your efforts in fighting anti-Semitism. Let's start with Anila. If you could tell us a little bit about your organization and what it has to do with anti-Semitism, really.
Hi, I think you had called on me, although I didn't quite hear, but good afternoon, good morning, good time of day wherever you are. In spite of the virtual background, I'm not in Israel, I'm in Brooklyn, New York, and happy to be speaking with you. So I grew up in the Soviet Union in the 60s and 70s. And when I was growing up there, anti-Semitism was a normal thing. Normal in the sense that it was pervasive. It was understood to be there both from the point of view of the state and among the public. It meant that if you were to achieve anything, you had to try harder and be better than anyone else around you. It meant that when I was a kid, I had to have fist fights in the schoolyard and back at home with others calling me derisive Jewish names, and that when I wanted to go to college, I wouldn't be accepted simply because I was Jewish. And I was part of the generation that, for the first time in many years, actually declared its desire to leave the country because of anti-Semitism and moved to Israel, to the United States, to Canada, and to other places around the world. The paradox then was that we weren't allowed to leave, so we're supposed to stay and endure the persecution and discrimination, which, as I said, was totally a normal part of life, sort of what you hear from people in the racial justice movement today when they talk about how racism is just endemic to life where they are. So when we tried to leave the country, as I said, we weren't allowed, and then an amazing thing happened. All around the world, a movement of people emerged that involved governments, involved churches, involved religious and non-for-profit organizations, all advocating for Jews of the Soviet Union to be allowed to practice their faith and their religion and freedom of movement and go wherever they pleased. And it seemed completely an impossibility. Nobody could leave the Soviet Union to emigrate, and the country and the state seemed so solid and so extraordinarily strong that there was no thought that this could be overcome. Nevertheless,
so we're going to have to take a little break. We're going to show a clip now, and then we'll get back to our panel.
Of human history, sometimes people have come together to make great progress, to free people, fight for equal rights, and overcome evil. People of conscience have also stood up for the Jewish people in times of distress, to create the State of Israel after the Holocaust, and liberate Jews from the former Soviet Union. But now we must come together again. Today, innocent people are being berated, beaten, terrorized, and murdered simply because of their faith. It's happening in places with large Jewish populations and in places where Jews are virtually alone. Today, Jews are being attacked from the far right, the far left, and by a new form called anti-Zionism. Jews are being targeted, online, on campuses, on the streets, and in the halls of important institutions. While many organizations and individuals are combating the scourge, more must be done. So the Combat Antisemitism Movement was created. This grassroots movement is bringing together hundreds of organizations and hundreds of thousands of individuals dedicated to making the world better. The movement has a wealth of tools to combat this hate. A digital platform that enables everyone to participate. A website where activities of terrific organizations are shared. A newsletter that disseminates critical news. A forum for people to tell their stories. Contests that enable winners to fund their ideas. And we're giving everyone the chance to join in now. The movement will use its collective power to influence governments, institutions, students, and more world leaders.
Anti-Semitism must never be tolerated.
L'antisémitisme en France, c'est d'abord et avant tout le problème de la République.
We cannot, we must not, and we will not ignore it or tolerate it.
Working together, people have accomplished great things. Now it's our turn to come together and help turn hate into hope, anger into understanding, and anti-Semitism into an anathema forevermore.
Mr. Galperin, if you could continue and maybe tell us a little bit about your efforts on the Interfaith front to work with partners of other religions on fighting anti-Semitism.
All right. So just as the Soviet Jewry movement was a movement not by Jews only and not by Israel only, but by people and faith and churches and across the globe. In fact, one of its heroes, Natan Sharansky, was once told by the KGB that this is a movement of students and housewives, and this was said in derision. But in fact, that's what it was. It was a movement that mobilized the grassroots. That's what the Combat Antisemitism Movement is about. We understood and realized that we must involve people of good conscience of all faiths in this effort, and that anti-Semitism, Jew hatred, needs to be opposed and fought by everyone across the board. As long as it remains a Jewish problem, it will stay a Jewish problem, and it can't be. And so we've reached out to organizations and people like are on today's panel to talk about it, because most Christians and most Muslims and Buddhists and Hindus and others are people of good conscience and oppose this horrible menace. And we need to all come together in order to overcome it.
Thank you. And with that, we'll move on to the other panelists. Ms. Ali, I'm very interested in what your organization does and what kind of partnerships you've had with Jewish groups to fight anti-Semitism.
Well, I'm Anila Ali. Thank you for having me. I am the president of AMWEC, and AMWEC is a women-run nonprofit that tackles issues that we as women are uniquely positioned to address, such as domestic violence, workplace discrimination, and relationships with faith communities and law enforcement. And we believe in responsible Muslim leadership in America. For me, anti-Semitism is very personal. After 9/11, I realized that I had to do something. Just like many Muslims got up and said, oh, we've got to get engaged in community and mainstream America. I also felt the same need. I had kids growing up in England and in Pakistan, in the US. And I wanted to make sure that what happened to me in the United States, in England, does not happen to my kids growing up in America. I grew up in the 70s and 80s in England, and as you know, I was called Paki, and so many things happened that shaped my life. I really rolled up my sleeves and I said, what can I do for the future of the kids in the United States? And when I founded AMWEC, I felt that women have a special role to play. Even in growing up in Pakistan, I lived in Saudi Arabia, I've lived in many countries around the world. I felt that women are not given a voice. They are not given a platform. And that is why I came to America And I founded a women's organization because I do feel that women have that special touch, and we can do a lot more as matriarchs, as mothers, as sisters, as community leaders. And
so
we founded
are you working with Jewish women's groups on anti-Semitism?
So actually, I'm working with a lot of Jewish groups, because when I was attacked and the Muslim community was attacked after 9/11, the first people to come forward and help us were the Jewish people. And what actually made me do more about anti-Semitism and become partners with Sasha here at the Combat Antisemitism Movement is that I heard a lot of anti-Semitic narratives and rhetoric coming out of my own community. And I felt that if we are leaders, we're going to expose that, and we're actually going to say something about it. And I decided that we had to open up our Muslim women's organization to interfaith women. And we have Jewish board members. In fact, I have lots of my Jewish friends that are supporting us, because we have seen anti-Semitism grow in America, and I have seen it grow around the world. And we are, fiercely fighting it on the ground.
Has there been any pushback from your community on that?
Well, I've been around for 15, 20 years doing what I'm doing. So initially, yes, I faced a lot of issues within my community, and people thought, oh, why are you saying this for the Jewish people? And, what I told them was, look, 9/11 happened in the Muslim, there were some Muslim organizations that blamed the Jews for it. San Bernardino killing happened. And the same thing happened, which is when I took a really fierce, bold stand, because I was engaged in that terrorist attack. And I know what happened. And we were partners with law enforcement in making sure things like that never happen again. So when there were videos going around saying, oh, it's 3 Jewish white men that did San Bernardino, I took offense to that. And as a Muslim, that is my faith, that, we need to expose the truth. We need to fight for justice. I came forward and I took on these organizations. And when you speak the truth, you know that God helps you. And really, I think that's the moment that my organization and a huge majority of the Muslims in America, they stood with me around the world as well. And we realized that we have to speak up for our Jewish brothers and sisters, and anybody else, like the Jewish people do. And I often talk about the fact that when there was the talk of this, Muslim registry and everything, the first people that have embraced me have been my Jewish brothers and sisters and said, Anila, what do you need? The Pakistani community, the Muslim community, ADL, Combat Antisemitism is our partner now. I've partnered with ADL for a very long time. And when Pakistanis were called terrorists in a city hall, it was the Jewish community that came forward. We are learning, as Muslims, we're growing in politics and public service. But our Jewish brothers and sisters, they're the ones who showed us how to do many things. And now when they need us, we've got to be there for them.
Thank you so much. It's very interesting. And I want to use the time that we have left to talk to Pastor Stavrakos about what he is doing in his church in Pennsylvania to fight anti-Semitism. If you could elaborate.
Sure. We are in a context where the community that Gladwyne Presbyterian Church is located is a very diverse population. It has a very sizable Jewish community. And we are enriched when we are able to worship together in different forms, where we can do educational programming to learn more about the roots that we both share. I commonly tell people that if my Lord and Savior is Jewish, then I need to know more about Jewish traditions. I need to know more about who he was as a person. And so a lot of the work that we've done locally has been to reach out and to work side by side with the Jewish community, whether it's the individual synagogues, whether it's the Federation, whether it's Hadassah, whatever group that might be interested in working on a variety of issues that we both share concerns about. we're unfortunately seeing a rise in anti-Semitism in mainline denominations like the Presbyterian Church that is primarily revolved around issues related to anti-Zionist rhetoric, and a lot of it is couched in, traditionally negative personifications of the Jewish people. And so we've been working more and more closely with not just Presbyterian clergy, but also clergy from Lutheran churches and Episcopalian churches and Methodist churches to establish stronger educational materials to bring people together to study, so that anti-Semitism isn't some, amorphous thing that we can't get our heads around, but we can understand it by the direct impact that it has on people. And by working closely with the Jewish community, by working closely with groups like Combating Antisemitism, by creating face-to-face, one-on-one relationships, we can build stronger bridges.
Could you give us an example of one of the sort of educational activities that your church is engaged in?
Yeah, we actually did. Yeah, we actually did a joint program recently with the synagogue up the street, Beth Am Israel, where we actually looked at the Sermon on the Mount found in the Gospel of Matthew. And we talked about, what was the foundation that Jesus used to proclaim the different teachings that he wanted to use in the Sermon on the Mount. So my folks in the Christian tradition came to a better understanding of what the Jewish tradition already was, and how that opened the eyes of many to see that many of the rabbinic traditions that existed before and after Jesus lifted up the same values. And so the Sermon on the Mount became less of a Christian teaching and more of a Judeo-Christian teaching that had more power and more emphasis of how God is calling us to live together.
Thank you so much. This has been very interesting to see how different religions can come together to fight anti-Semitism and to learn what we all have in common. So thank you very much for participating in this panel tonight.